Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another edition of the Boss Economic World, where we don't just read the news, we roast it, toast it, and sometimes even set it on fire, metaphorically, of course. Today's spicy topic, the Federal Reserve's policy strategy review and its unforeseen cameo as the reluctant culprit behind our current economic hangover. Buckle up as we dive into a satirical yet data-driven journey through the Fed's ambitious quest for a broad-based and inclusive job market recovery, and the unintended side effects that have left our wallets feeling lighter and our patience thinner. In August 2020, amid societal unrest, a global pandemic, and the lingering ghosts of the 2008 financial crisis, the Fed decided to rewrite its playbook. With unemployment skyrocketing over 10% and inflation playing hide-and-seek well below its 2% target, policymakers thought it was high time for a refresh. Instead of worrying about both ends of the employment spectrum, they redefined maximum employment to focus solely on avoiding shortfalls. In other words, they'd only be concerned when unemployment was too high, not when it dipped too low. The aim? To ensure that every fringe worker, from gig economy savants to overqualified baristas, could finally taste the sweet nectar of economic inclusion. This recalibration was meant to prioritize equity and ensure that the recovery was felt by all segments of society. After all, if your neighbor landed a job while you were left holding the unemployment check, things just wouldn't feel right. But as with many good intentions, the devil lurked in the details. This reimagined mandate meant that, historically, the Fed had raised rates preemptively when unemployment was low to keep inflation at bay. Eliminating that safety net meant that as soon as inflation started peeking over the horizon, well, we were left scrambling with inadequate defenses. Fast forward to 2021, inflation started to surge, sending shivers down the spine of every economist who had spent nights obsessing over career trajectories and interest rate curves. The Brookings Institution-branded paper by Christina and David Romer, along with the scathing critique from Michael Kiley, a senior Fed staffer who isn't afraid to speak his mind, paints a vivid picture. The new framework's narrow focus on employment shortfalls paved the way for a sluggish response to rising inflation. In their view, the Fed's tolerance for low unemployment essentially gave inflation the green light to run wild, a notion that has led to a cascade of price hikes that feel eerily reminiscent of a hot mess express in motion. Consider this, while many expected a nimble and preemptive response to rising prices, the Fed held steady, confident that price increases were merely transitory. Fed Chair Jerome Powell argued that there was no need to preemptively want to put people out of work when inflation was still a distant threat, stating, "I don't think that insight is wrong. But hindsight, as they say, is 20/20ths. The data now suggests that inflation has been anything but transitory, and the delayed tightening has left many questioning whether the quest for inclusivity inadvertently stoked the flames of inflation." Let's throw some numbers into the ring. In 2021, while measures like the Consumer Price Index, CPI, began ticking upward, inflation soon overshot well beyond the Fed's 2% target, breaching 5% at its peak in certain months. Meanwhile, unemployment rates, after hitting historic lows in 2023, the lowest in over 5 decades, mind you, have not fully offset the growing pains of an economy trying to balance a double-edged sword of low unemployment and high inflation. For instance, the Atlanta Fed reported that wage growth for the lowest earners surged, outpacing overall wage growth at rates not seen since the 1990s, a pleasant irony for workers caught in a tempest of soaring prices. If the Fed's internal debate wasn't enough to keep everyone on their toes, enter the political drama. Even as the Fed tried to maintain its branding of a broad-based and inclusive employment goal, President Trump's executive orders came knocking. The order aimed at scaling back diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, programs in federal agencies even managed to ruffle the feathers inside the Fed's hallowed halls. It was a classic case of, do as I say, not as I do, where the political sphere's attempts to redefine inclusivity seemingly contradicted the central bank's policy statements. Although the Fed, at least for now, retained its language advocating inclusivity in employment, such political maneuvers underscore the complex interplay between democratic policymaking and central bank independence. The resulting tension is akin to watching a central bank trying to dance gracefully on a tightrope while politicians hurl pies from the sidelines. Who wins? In this round, it seems the American taxpayer often bears the brunt of the fallout. Now, let's play a bit of what if with the Fed strategy. Imagine if, instead of waiting for inflation to rear its treacherous head, the Fed had adopted a more preemptive stance. By raising rates when the unemployment rate was low, a previously tried and tested method, the Fed might have nipped inflation in the bud. According to critics like the aforementioned Romers and Kiley, the omission of these preemptive hikes in 2021 allowed the inflation monster to grow unchecked. The result? A surge in economic volatility that not only amplified inflationary pressures but also set the stage for a deeper recession later on, as every rate hike has a "you snooze, you lose" effect on employment longevity. This isn't just theoretical musing. Take, for example, the data from the Chicago Fed, where Charles Evans, a longtime authority on labor markets, warned that the shift in focus from preemptive action to reactive measures might backfire. Evans opined that the Fed's new framework, by being overly employment-friendly, could come at a steep cost to long-term job stability. Indeed, it's a classic case of short-term political gain versus long-term economic pain, a trade-off that leaves many wondering if the Fed's balancing act is more akin to a circus trick than sound economic policymaking. Let's not forget that when inflation outstrips the Fed's 2% target for too long, the central bank faces mounting pressure to implement aggressive rate hikes. And as history reminds us, aggressive tightening can quickly drag an economy from a full-throttle recovery into a pothole-ridden recession. The lessons from the 1970s, when stagflation reared its ugly head, serve as a stark warning that the simultaneous struggle with high inflation and high unemployment is not just rare in theory but devastating in practice. Let's zoom into the more recent data. In 2023, we've seen the unemployment rate drop to levels that would make economists break into a faint smile, if only those numbers didn't come with the hidden cost of runaway inflation. The labor market's kinetic energy has indeed injected vitality into the economy, with record-low unemployment rates and significant wage gains for lower-income workers. For instance, the unemployment rate for black workers fell to a record low, signaling progress in what historically was a battleground for equality and inclusion. And yet, this very progress may have inadvertently stoked inflationary trends. When labor markets operate at near full capacity, the supply and demand dynamics shift drastically, often leading to wage price spirals. When workers have more bargaining power, employers face higher wage bills, which are often passed on to consumers in the form of higher prices. It's an economic paradox that echoes the proverbial catch-22, trying to fix one problem may unfortunately exacerbate another. The Fed's doctrine of inclusive growth might have filled the employment gap for many, but critics argue it left insufficient room for a contingency plan against inflation's venomous bite. A case in point, the rapid pace of wage growth among the lowest earners, while a win for consumer purchasing power in the short term, has also pushed prices upward faster than many anticipated. This dynamic is exacerbated when coupled with supply chain bottlenecks and geopolitical disruptions that continue to challenge global trade. In a way, this scenario is reminiscent of trying to fill a bathtub with the water turned on full blast while simultaneously trying to plug the drain. The result? An economically bizarre and unsustainable situation that leaves both policymakers and market participants questioning the rationale behind their strategies. So, what's the takeaway from all this? Should the Fed revert to its pre-pandemic script, or is there a middle ground that champions both inclusivity and inflation control? The debate is far from settled. Fed Chair Powell and his loyalists maintain that the framework, despite its shortcomings, was a product of its time, a necessary evolution to address systemic inequalities. They argue that the issues we face today are more about how the framework was operationalized, rather than the framework itself. Take Julia Coronado, for instance, a former Fed economist turned policy pundit, who suggests that while the 2020 review offers important lessons, there is ample room for refining the strategy. According to her, the Fed needs to learn how to be robust across different policy environments, an acknowledgement that the post-pandemic economy is as unpredictable as a cat on a hot tin roof. By refining their guidance, and perhaps adding a bit more nuance to their operational playbook, the Fed could potentially avert the pitfalls of an overly simplistic focus on either end of the economic spectrum. Political pressure, market volatility, and the ever-looming specter of inflation all mean that the Fed's policy decisions will continue to be scrutinized under a financial microscope. What's clear, however, is that there is no perfect solution, a sentiment that resonates with every Wall Street buzzer-beater and Main Street shopkeeper alike. The Fed's current predicament is a classic case of competing objectives, the desire to maintain full employment without igniting inflation, akin to walking a tightrope in a windstorm. At the heart of this controversy lies a series of difficult questions. Did the Fed's priority for inclusive employment inadvertently delay the necessary rate hikes to control inflation? Can we blame a policy framework for being too kind to the labor force when it comes at significant long-term economic costs? And most crucially, how do we balance the pursuit of equality with the imperatives of price stability, a balancing act that feels less like an art and more like a high-wire circus performance? Critics argue that the Fed's emphasis on employment over inflation in 2020 was a policy misstep that has now cost us dearly in the form of economic instability and unpredictable market conditions. They point to data from 2021 and 2023 that show us a mixed and somewhat chaotic picture, unprecedented levels of employment paired with inflation numbers that make everyday shopping trips resemble an exercise in financial endurance. Meanwhile, Governor Powell and his camp insist that the framework's intent was noble and that the true fault lies in the fine-tuning of its implementation, not the structure itself. As ordinary viewers and finance professionals alike, it's critical to keep an eye on this unfolding narrative. The stakes are high as the mortgage rates affecting first-time homebuyers and the ballooning prices in your neighborhood grocery store. Future policy reviews, notably the slated 2025 review, are likely to determine whether these controversial decisions were a misguided experiment or a necessary adaptation to an evolving economic landscape. One thing is certain, the American economy is a complex beast. Like a well-cooked gumbo, it's a mix of ingredients, employment, inflation, global supply chains, and political interference, each steaming with potential pitfalls if not handled with care. As we watch the Fed's next moves, we're reminded that economic policy is not an exact science, it's an intricate dance that requires both precision and flexibility. So, as we sip our morning coffee and glance at the latest economic charts, let us ask, are we witnessing a period of necessary transformation, or have we simply traded one set of woes for another? In the world of macroeconomics, where numbers rule and human lives are at stake, the answer might just depend on how well the next round of policy measures can untangle the web of modern economic challenges. Until next time, remember, in economics, as in life, there's never a shortage of irony. Keep your data close, your humor closer, and always question whether those well-intentioned policies are paving the way for a brighter tomorrow or merely a more expensive cup of coffee. This is Boss Economic World, where we tell it like it is, with a dash of wit and a hefty serving of skepticism. Stay sharp and stay tuned.